On today's show, we'll be diving into the game of the most violent defenseman eligible in the 2025 NHL draft class, Kashawn Aitcheson.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be delving into the game of an OHL talent in this year's draft class, Kashawn Aitcheson, who just brings flagrant violence and physicality, a true throwback style to 90s kind of defending, of big open ice hits, crushing physicality, and certainly some overcommitment on plays, but overall, a very exciting talent on both the defensive side, but also offensively, with some really high engagement in the offensive zone, as well as an absolute howitzer of a shot. So that's the player that we'll be delving into on today's show. We'll be kicking things off, breaking down his profile and the quality of his tools, whether it be the skating, the physicality, the passing, or the shooting abilities. Then we'll move on in the second segment to looking more at the mental side of the game, the toolkit, the habits, how things come together in his game, and how that package is going to project to the NHL pace and style, especially come playoff time. And finally, we're going to wrap things up by looking ahead a little bit at where he might go on draft day, which NHL teams might be the best fits, and which NHL players have some similar qualities and styles to what Aitcheson brings to the ice. So that's what we're looking at for today's show. So without further ado, let's just dive straight into it here. So let's kick things off with Kashawn Aitcheson's profile. Who is this player? Kashawn Aitcheson is a 6'1.5", 196-pound left shot defenseman who's been playing with the Barrie Colts in the OHL this season. And he put up 26 goals and 59 points in 64 games as, again, the most physical player in the draft class here this season. Really, really impressive in terms of that combination of that crushing physicality defensively and that big-time offense, and especially through his shot, but also, again, 33 assists this season, at 0.52 assists a game and 0.92 points per game this year. That's excellent production for a guy where the offense isn't even the biggest selling point in his toolkit. Some really exciting stuff there with that profile. But this is also a player who's quite old for this year's draft class, which has to be noted. He's born just 6 days after the cutoff for the 2024 NHL draft, as a September 21st, 06 birthday. So a player who definitely has some pros and cons in this profile. There's a nice diversity of tools, but they're also very specific, and there are some weaknesses surrounding those. And at the same time, also an older player for this year's class. So he's gone through a bit more physical development, certainly, than other prospects in the draft class here this season, but still a profile that without a doubt is going in the first round, most likely is going in the top 15, and may even crack the top 10. This is a guy that I think a lot of NHL teams are going to have their eyes on, especially after watching the 2025 playoffs, where the Florida Panthers especially just playing a dirty, heavy, hard-hitting style of hockey, made it to a third consecutive Stanley Cup final appearance. And Kashawn Aitcheson, among all players outside the top 10, is probably the guy that fits that style the very best, or at least one of the best on the back end, in terms of bringing that crushing aspect in physicality, and also being able to chip in with a goal every now and again. And it was more than every now and again this season in the OHL, with nearly half a goal a game coming from the blue line. And there's a lot of habits that support that goal scoring that could really translate nicely to the National Hockey League level. So let's kick things off here with Kashawn Aitcheson's tools. There are quite a few fun elements here, as we've been kind of prefacing here to start the episode, and everything revolves around his physicality. He is a 7.5 or 8 grade physical player by our grading scale at Elite Prospects. If you want to look at what that means, it's in the description down below, with some examples of what each number could signify. Basically, it means that A 1 is basically my skating ability as someone who's never played organized hockey, and a 9 being like Connor McDavid's skating ability, who has certainly played some organized hockey. But a 5 being like an NHL average kind of projection of like your average bottom 6 tool. Like that's kind of what a 5 grade signifies. So to be a 7.5 or an 8 level physical player is truly a high end kind of projection. That's bordering towards like the most physical players in the NHL once he hits his prime. And I see that with Aitcheson. And he's not even the biggest, heaviest guy, as we mentioned, right? Like not even 6'2". He's sub 200 pounds, but absolutely vicious. And the checking ability, like the mechanics in his open ice hits, his board smothering ability, all of these physical tools are truly high end with Kashawn Aitcheson. He really is able to line things up in open ice. He can track players from long distances, and overall, he's a player that is not fun to play against. I would not choose to play against this player if I were to get on the ice because I think I would get hit over the boards onto the team bench if I'm lucky, and maybe even over the glass if I'm not. So Kashawn Aitcheson is just a very, very fun player to watch with that flagrant physicality. And it's something that really supports the rest of his game, but also leaves him room for some weaknesses in terms of the habits and overcommitting on hits and chasing hits and getting dragged out of position, right? These elements have struggled a little bit, but those can be tweaked and fixed down the road. This physicality is not something that every single player, I mean, not even 10% of players, can bring to your team. So definitely a lot of reason to get excited around the physicality with Aitcheson, but the shot is also really, really good. And it's not just the actual mechanics of the shot. I mean, like a load of power, very hard shot, one-timer, snapshot, wrist shot from the blue line. All of these are heavy releases. He's able to get pucks through traffic, but what makes him special as a shooter, especially as a draft eligible in the CHL, is that he's not a player who just spams shots from the blue line. He's a guy who gets into the upper mid slot, gets set, and is a real shooting threat, not just a guy who's shooting as an outlet because he's under pressure. He's a player who's really proactive with his shot. He gets into dangerous positions, and he has the quality of his release to beat goaltenders and to get pucks through traffic. And he's able to time his release quite nicely as well with flybys or potential tipping options or screens in front of the net. There's a real level of foresight and also aggression in his shooting habits. Like he definitely will just like skate right into a shot and just hammer it slightly blindly, just trying to force something through. But it's also situational. He doesn't just do that when he's under pressure for no reason. There's always a constructive aspect, I think, to how he uses his shot, which is something that bodes quite nicely. In terms of the passing ability, it's probably more around NHL average as a projection. There's a level of haste and panic, I think, especially in his breakout passing, that we're going to talk a bit more about in the second segment. But mechanically, he's fine as a passer. But how he was getting his assists this season was just about his involvement offensively. It was being in the right positions, being in supportive places, and quickly making plays to try to support the cycle rather than being like a true playmaker from the blue line. His passing ability isn't something that's going to be able to dissect defenses at the next level, but it is something that could work together in like a cycle and quickly interchanging pucks at the NHL level. And he has the passing ability to keep up, but maybe not quite to create at a very high extent. The handling, I think, is also kind of similar. There are some weaknesses. There are some strengths. I think there's a decent amount of fluidity with it. He's able to blend it nicely with his puck protection mechanics because he is just so strong and physically capable. Handling inside contact, these are all benefits, but he also struggles a bit to get the puck closer into his body, and he can get poke checked or stick lifted. So I think the handling is a relatively average projection. I don't think it breaks down constantly or brings a lot of like issues to his game, but also doesn't really create all that much either. So it's kind of like a tool that treads water and should continue doing so as he progresses up the ranks. And lastly, I wanted to broach his skating ability, which I also see as NHL average, around a 5 grade, especially in terms of fluidity and all 4 directions. Like he's a pretty solid skater. The edges are nice. There's a decent level of agility. What's still lacking a little bit is that like lateral explosiveness. And when he closes his gaps, it can be telegraphed a little bit and gives a rusher some time to adapt, even though he is like such a menace in terms of the physicality. He can't teleport in terms of closing those gaps. And I think adding some more explosiveness and some adaptability in his defensive skating would go a long way to improving his rush defending and not just being a spot defender in the defensive zone where players can kind of like go around him, but he's able to block off like the most direct route to the slot, which is kind of what he's been doing this season in the OHL. But that wraps things up here for the first segment. In the next one, we'll talk about the mental side of the game, the hockey sense, the toolkit, how things blend together in his game, and how that's going to project to the NHL level. All that coming up after these messages from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you feel fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell variety are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, breaking down the game of Kashawn Aitcheson, the violent left shot defenseman from the Barrie Colts in the OHL, who, again, scored 59 points in 64 games this season to go alongside 88 penalty minutes, which was a lot more disciplined than he was last year in his second OHL campaign, where in 64 games he scored 39 points, pretty good as well, and 126 penalty minutes. The physical involvement's certainly very high end with this player, and he's also gotten a bit better at balancing the risks that he's taking, especially in terms of what gets penalized at the OHL level. So let's talk a little bit about this player's head. How does he think the game? What are the things that stand out in his hockey sense? I think what stands out the most to me, and yes, this is definitely in correlation with physicality, but it's just pure raw aggression. This is a player who has a real level of haste to his game, mostly for better, sometimes for worse. Especially as a breakout passer, he can just be way too hasty and shovel the puck up the ice, and then just ends up being an odd man rush coming right back towards him that he then has to stop, which he usually does, but it's kind of that rinse and repeat for a couple times during each game. But still, I think that level of aggression is going to help him so much when he then goes to the NHL level and progresses to the pro ranks. And on top of that aggression, I also think that the understanding of especially offensive sequences and spacing and timing and riding blind spots and getting into positions where he can be a scoring threat from the periphery of the upper slot. These instincts are really quite refined with Kashawn Aitcheson. He's such an involved player, but he's able to manage risk quite well with his offensive zone positioning, still staying in spots where he's able to then make up ground and make a recovery route to defend an odd man rush going the other way. And I saw that multiple times this season in my viewings where, yeah, he took some more aggressive offensive positions, like going all the way up to the hash mark sometimes, but usually sticking a little bit further back than that. And then wrong bounce, puck goes towards the neutral zone. You see a streaking winger trying to get to it, and Aitcheson is able to curve his route and intercept the play before it gets right back to his own net front. But at the same time, that explosiveness in the stride is going to need some more work to translate that recovery speed to the professional level. But that said, I do like the fact that at this level, he has a really keen understanding of which risks he can take offensively and which he can't. That risk assessment in terms of the physicality and the hit chasing is a bit more of a work in progress, but the fact that we're already seeing this in the offensive positioning gives me hope that he'll be able to develop that relatively quickly on the physical and defensive side as well in the coming seasons as he continues his development. But Let's talk a little bit about just how much of a throwback this player is. And he's a classic 90s defender. Like you look at, I mean, for me, I look at Scott Stevens like highlight reel clips because I wasn't born when he was playing in his prime, at least in the 90s. And I see some similarities there with Kashawn Aitcheson in terms of being able to line up hits and just change his momentum at the right time and just crush players in open ice. There's a real level of entertainment value there. Certainly, fans I think are going to love this player wherever he lands. I think he'll end up a fan favorite because he can get fans out of their seats with defensive implications. And at the same time, I also see some deficiencies in that style because there's a reason that the NHL moved away from that primarily that style in the 90s, and it's just continuing to modernize now, where complex rush patterns and being able to fine tune your spacing and where strategy and structure are so important defensively. That's not the situation that Aitcheson thrives the very most in defensively. He's a guy that wants to go kill the play right up front and try to get the puck back going offensively rather than just mitigating risk and keeping play to the outside. He wants to go chase after the puck a little bit to get it back and to move the play back up ice. And that aggression serves him very well, but also has some immature ripple effects in his habits defensively and where he finds himself and sometimes being dragged out of his positions. What I do like as well about the offensive game, however, to go back to that part, is his shot selection, right? Like he's just so efficient almost, right? He doesn't waste shots from the blue line. He's not a guy that's just going to hammer the shot button because he has an above average shot. He tries to get into places and spots where that's going to be able to actually make a difference. And not just at the OHL level, but sustainably as he goes up the ranks as well. And these habits, I think, are going to support the flourishing of a more like nuanced offensive impact as well. I think the playmaking has some room to grow if he's able to start using his shot as a deceptive tool to find a pass and overall also drag checkers in towards him and have a slightly gravitational effect. These things I think could still take some nice steps for this player, and he has such a unique profile, which is likely going to be like the nail in the coffin that gets him selected inside the top 15 on draft day. In terms of that violence, the physicality, the Howitzer of a shot from the blue line, that gives teams a profile and an adaptability on the blue line that not many other players out there give at this stage. And I think that's going to also just make him such a fan favorite with playoff boom potential. Guy who's just going to play way more minutes come playoff time than he does in the regular season. And on top of that is going to be very, very, very unfortunate to come up against come playoff time because he's going to inflict more than a couple bruises there in the NHL someday. But that wraps things up here for us in the second segment. In the next one, I wanted to break down our overall predictions of where you might go on draft day, what his ceiling and floor are in the NHL, which NHL team would be the best fit, and which players actually have similar styles to him in the National Hockey League. All that coming up after these messages from our sponsors at Locked On NHL Prospects. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, breaking down the game of Kashawn Aitcheson, the violent 6'2" left shot defenseman who just, I'm sure, has had multiple teams and scouting staffs fall in love with him this season because he brings something that no other defenseman in this year's class can really bring to this level, especially in terms of that violence and goal scoring combination. Where does that get him selected on draft day, though? This is a big question, and I think he's certainly a player who's risen his stock to a top 20 valuation, but I wouldn't be shocked to see him selected in the top 10 either. We already know that Matthew Schaefer is going to be the first defenseman selected. He's most likely going to be the first player selected on draft day, and the second defenseman is probably going to be Radim Mrtka, who brings 6'6" in height and some offensive runway and what he's developing, but just some really mature defensive habits. And I think that gets him picked over Aitcheson. But beyond that, players like Jackson Smith and Logan Hensler, I think that teams might have some more question marks around those players than they would around Kashawn Aitcheson. I know it's different, at least for us at Elite Prospects. We have a lot more certainty in especially Jackson Smith, not just becoming an NHLer, but a really impactful one at that. But still, with Aitcheson, you have a profile that rarely misses out on cracking the NHL in some capacity. So I think that that'll get him selected pretty high up on draft day. And he's ranked anywhere between like 11th overall in the public by Daily Faceoff to, I mean, 46th overall by Tony Ferrari and 37th by Smart Scouting. But more often than not, these rankings are kind of stuck between 11 and like 23, 11 and 24 maybe. So I think that's the range where he's going, but I would really, really bet that he's going in the first half of that range, because there's going to be teams that want size, that want physicality, that want this profile of playoff bred defenseman for their lineups. And there's no better option this season in that profile than Kashawn Aitcheson. So I definitely think he's going to go in that like 8 to 20 range. Like maybe if a team wants to take that reach in the top 10, wouldn't shock me, but I wouldn't necessarily expect it either. I think it's more likely it goes between 10th and 15th overall. And there's also a chance he falls to like maybe 19th overall, where like the St. Louis Blues are selecting. And I'd be pretty surprised if Aitcheson fell past them. They need a left shot defenseman now that Torrey Krug is likely out for his career. They want more physicality in that lineup. They always love that. And they want that kind of like offensive combination with defensive solidity, and Kashawn Aitcheson brings just that. But beyond the St. Louis Blues, who else might take that swing? If we're talking at 12th overall, I think the New York Rangers might be looking long and hard at him. They're going to probably be switching things around a little bit on the blue line. I mean, Jacob Trouba was already shown the door last season, and there are rumblings that they might be moving on from K'Andre Miller. I wouldn't be shocked to see them going for a player like Kashawn Aitcheson with that 12th overall pick that they have in the draft. And beyond the Rangers, I also think the Columbus Blue Jackets might look this direction. They are probably most in need of a right shot defenseman, but if they want to just double down on physicality and a defensive profile that they lack in their system, especially among younger players who can bring violence and goal scoring, whereas many of the other pieces here are really good puck movers and playmakers and passers of the puck, Aitcheson just brings a complete different area of strength. And I know that diversity is something that the Blue Jackets would certainly value. So I'd be curious to see if those teams are fits, but honestly, any team in this range of the draft, I think, could easily be convinced to select a player of this mold. Continuing, let's look at the overall ceiling for Kashawn Aitcheson. And I think that we're looking at a potential second pair rush stopper and play killer with an absolute howitzer of a shot. A player who is able to play reliable minutes, kill plays defensively, brings his physicality every single shift, can insulate perhaps a bit more of a small, dynamic right shot defenseman as his pairing mate, and just be a rover and pick things up defensively with that physicality. And sure, sometimes overcommits and gets burned, but where the pros just outweigh the cons, and the goal scoring, maybe even the second power play, like minutes would really also boom that production value at the NHL level. So a lot to look forward to, I think, with Kashawn Aitcheson in terms of that upper echelon upside. But in terms of floor, I still think he's an likely NHLer because of just how violent he is. I don't really see a possibility where in like 6-7 years time, he hasn't like buoyed his way up to at least like a 7th defenseman role for an NHL team who comes in and plays some minutes come playoff time. We've seen that quite a bit, especially this season in the playoffs, of players that were maybe playing in the minor leagues for much of the season and then got called up for the playoffs. Like I'm thinking of, I think it was Alex Petrovic of the Dallas Stars who was in that situation, but then where the physicality and tenacity and defensive reliability just become really valuable in the playoffs, even though they weren't contributing all that much in the regular season. So that to me is kind of the baseline floor for Kashawn Aitcheson, but there's definitely more upside beyond that level. Last but not least, let's talk about some player comps, some players in the NHL who have similarities to Kashawn Aitcheson. And let's start off with Jacob Trouba. I think that the violence, the physicality, the combination of that with fluid skating and just like a penchant for violence. I see a lot of similarities there. And I'm not just talking about Jacob Trouba from the last like 2-3 years, but when he was also a very effective player earlier on in his career, I could totally see that for Kashawn Aitcheson. But Aitcheson definitely has a bigger shot than Trouba ever has. That goal scoring threat is another element on top of everything else there with the Jacob Trouba player comp. But for some perhaps lower end player comparisons, we have Arbor Jacki of the Montreal Canadiens. This is perhaps more if Aitcheson caps out as a third pairing piece who can bring some mobility, brings rampant physicality, can get some good shots off from the blue line, but whose decision making and processing pace and overall like risk assessment on puck, especially in breakouts and on retrievals, does mean that the coach has to manage the ice time and the matchups a little bit. I could see that as a possibility as well. But last but not least, we have Radko Gudas of the Anaheim Ducks here to mention as well, in terms of, again, that physicality, the edge in play, and overall just being a really painful net front player to come up against. These are all elements that Aitcheson brings as well. And I think that this profile, especially after these NHL playoffs, is going to get selected relatively high in the first round. But for me personally, is probably more a player I'd have ranked around 20th overall in terms of my rankings. I think that the upside is a bit more limited than other players that could be had in the top 15 range, but still a very projectable player who has runway to improve different elements, but still has to put a couple things together, especially in terms of that explosiveness in his skating and the decision making and the pace of play and the composure under pressure to really make things tick at the NHL level in a second pairing capacity. But that wraps things up here for today's episode. I would love to hear about your opinions in the comments down below. If you're watching on YouTube, please do let me know. What are your thoughts on Aitcheson? Would you like your team to go out and select this player? Or do you have some more doubts and hesitation with certain elements of his game? I'd love to hear from you down below. And if you're listening on your podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers here on the podcast. And for your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything that you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. That's everything from me today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I am your host, Sebastian High, and I look forward to catching you tuning in again very, very soon.